Let's talk about something most people never question, something so deeply woven into daily life that it feels like common sense. The need to control everything. The belief that if you just think hard enough, plan carefully enough, worry intensely enough, you can somehow secure your future. It sounds reasonable. It feels responsible. But if you look closer, you'll see how heavy that belief really is. Control is seductive. It gives the illusion of safety. It makes you feel as though nothing can surprise you, nothing can shake you, nothing can go wrong if you stay mentally tense and constantly alert. But life has never operated that way. Life does not bend to anxiety. It does not respond to fear-based overthinking. And yet, people exhaust themselves trying to manage every possible outcome as though uncertainty were a flaw rather than a natural part of existence. Think about how much energy it takes to live like that. Every decision becomes a battlefield, every delay becomes a threat. What if this fails? What if I'm making a mistake? What if something goes wrong? The questions never end because the desire for total control can never be satisfied. Here's the uncomfortable truth. You were never designed to control everything. No human being is. The world is far too complex, far too interconnected, far too dynamic for any single mind to orchestrate. Trying to dominate every variable is like trying to hold back the ocean with your hands. The more tightly you grip, the more you feel your own limitations. And this is where frustration begins. Because when reality inevitably refuses to cooperate with your carefully constructed expectations, it feels personal, it feels unfair. You begin to think something is wrong with the situation, with other people, sometimes even with yourself. But what's actually happening is much simpler. Life is reminding you of a fundamental boundary. You are responsible for your actions, not for every outcome. There is a profound difference between influence and control. Influence is healthy. Influence is powerful. It is where preparation, discipline, and effort live. Control, on the other hand, often hides fear. It demands guarantees that life cannot provide. It insists on certainty in a universe that thrives on change. And the cost of that insistence is constant tension. Notice how liberating it becomes when you accept this distinction, when you stop measuring your peace by your ability to predict everything, when you stop believing that uncertainty is an enemy. Strength begins not when life becomes perfectly predictable, but when you become steady within unpredictability. Consider how much of your past unfolded without your control. The encounters you did not plan, the opportunities you did not foresee, the challenges you never imagined you could survive. And yet, here you are, not because you controlled every moment, but because you adapted, responded, learned, endured. Life has always been a collaboration between your effort and forces far beyond your awareness. When you release the exhausting need to micromanage every possibility, something remarkable happens. The mind gains space, decisions become clearer, actions become more deliberate. You stop reacting from fear and start moving from confidence. Instead of desperately trying to force reality into your preferred shape, you begin to work with it. This does not mean becoming passive. It does not mean abandoning responsibility. It means focusing your energy where it actually has power. Your choices, your attitude, your persistence, your growth. It means recognizing that tension does not equal effectiveness and that worry does not equal wisdom. There is a quiet courage in letting go of false control. It is the courage to act without guarantees, to move forward without perfect certainty, to trust that not everything must be predicted to be navigated, because the reality is control has never been the source of stability people imagine it to be. Flexibility, resilience, clarity, these are the true anchors. And paradoxically, the less obsessed you become with controlling everything, the more capable and composed you feel. Not because life suddenly becomes easy, but because your inner world is no longer constantly at war with the unknown. You begin to understand a deeper kind of confidence, the confidence that whatever comes, you will meet it, that you do not need to mentally rehearse every disaster to be prepared. That strength is not built by eliminating uncertainty, but by standing firm within it. So when you feel that familiar urge to overgrip, to overthink, to overcontrol, pause for a moment. Ask yourself whether you are trying to influence what you can or dominate what you cannot. That awareness alone can shift your entire experience. There is something about waiting that unsettles the human mind. The moment things do not move according to your preferred timeline, discomfort creeps in. Doubt begins to whisper. You start measuring progress by speed, success by immediacy, and value by how quickly results appear. And when nothing seems to change, the easiest conclusion is the most dangerous one. This isn't working. This is going nowhere. I'm being denied. But life does not operate on the narrow clock of personal impatience. What feels like stillness is often movement you cannot yet see. What feels like delay may actually be development. Yet people rarely consider this. The mind, conditioned for instant feedback and visible progress, interprets silence as failure. It mistakes the absence of evidence for evidence of absence. And in doing so, it creates unnecessary frustration, unnecessary fear, unnecessary despair.
Think about how many processes in life unfold beneath the surface.
A seed does not argue with the soil because growth is invisible. Foundations are not admired while they are being poured. Muscles do not strengthen during the lift, but during recovery. In every meaningful transformation, there is a period where nothing outwardly dramatic appears to happen. And still, essential work is underway. Timing is not accidental. Preparation has its own rhythm. When you assume that a pause equals rejection, you impose a story on reality that may have no connection to truth. You begin to see obstacles where there may be alignment. You begin to feel abandoned where there may be protection. Because sometimes the very thing you are demanding is being withheld not to harm you, but to position you. Consider how often people look back on life and realize that what they once called a setback was actually a safeguard. The opportunity that did not arrive would have overwhelmed them. The door that did not open would have led to distraction. The relationship that did not last would have limited their growth. But in the moment, none of that clarity exists. In the moment, delay feels like injustice. This is where patience becomes more than a virtue. It becomes a form of strength. Patience is not passive waiting. It is disciplined trust. It is the ability to continue moving, continue improving, continue believing, even when external validation is absent. It is emotional stability in the presence of uncertainty. And that stability is rare because the mind prefers immediate reassurance. But immediate does not always mean appropriate. There are seasons where your skills are being sharpened, your perspective is being widened, your resilience is being tested, not as punishment, but as preparation. Because receiving something before you are ready can be just as damaging as never receiving it at all. Responsibility without readiness becomes pressure. Opportunity without maturity becomes chaos. Success without foundation becomes collapse. Yet the mind resists this idea. It compares timelines. It watches others. It asks, why them and not me? Without realizing that comparison ignores the complexity of individual paths. No two journeys require the same preparation. No two lives unfold under identical conditions. What appears late from one perspective may be precisely timed from another. Delays often refine intention. They force you to examine whether your pursuit is driven by genuine purpose or temporary emotion. They reveal how committed you truly are. Anyone can maintain enthusiasm when results are immediate. Persistence becomes meaningful only when progress is slow, uncertain, or invisible. And here lies a subtle transformation when you stop interpreting delay as denial. Your entire emotional landscape shifts. Waiting no longer feels like helplessness. It becomes a period of strengthening. Instead of obsessing over what has not arrived, you begin investing in who you are becoming. Energy moves from frustration to preparation, from anxiety to growth. You realize that the absence of immediate results does not imply the absence of progress. Life is not obligated to reveal its workings on your preferred schedule. Many of its most important adjustments happen quietly, gradually, outside the narrow field of perception. Connections form, conditions change, capabilities develop, and often the breakthrough appears sudden only because the preparation was invisible. Trusting timing does not mean abandoning effort. It means understanding that effort and outcome are not always synchronized in ways the mind expects. You continue building, learning, refining, acting, not because guarantees exist, but because growth itself is never wasted. Nothing invested in discipline, character, or skill is ever truly lost. So when progress seems slow, when answers seem delayed, when movement appears absent, resist the reflex to assume rejection. There is wisdom in recognizing that not all pauses are empty and not all delays are obstacles. Fear has a peculiar way of disguising itself. It rarely storms into your mind announcing its presence. It arrives quietly, often wearing the mask of logic, caution, or foresight. It sounds reasonable. It feels protective. And before you even realize what's happening, your energy is being drained by battles that do not exist anywhere except inside your thoughts. The human mind is extraordinarily creative, but not always in ways that serve you. It can construct entire futures out of fragments of uncertainty. It can build convincing scenarios of failure without a single piece of concrete evidence. A single doubt becomes a story becomes a belief becomes an emotional reality. And suddenly you are reacting not to life as it is, but to life as you imagine it might be. This is the weight of imaginary fears. They feel real because your body does not distinguish sharply between an actual threat and a vividly imagined one. Your heart races, your muscles tense, your thoughts scatter, all triggered by events that have not occurred, may never occur, and in many cases are nothing more than mental projections. Yet the stress is genuine. The exhaustion is genuine. The limitation becomes genuine. Consider how often people suffer twice, once in imagination and once, if at all, in reality. A conversation that hasn't happened becomes a source of anxiety. An outcome that hasn't unfolded becomes a cause for dread. A possibility, however remote, becomes a certainty in the theater of the mind. The brain, attempting to protect you, begins scanning for dangers everywhere, amplifying uncertainty into alarm. But there is a critical question rarely asked in these moments. Is this happening now, or is this a story I am telling myself? That question has power because it interrupts the automatic fusion between thought and reality. It creates distance. It reminds you that not every mental image deserves emotional obedience. Thoughts are not commands. Predictions are not facts. Possibilities are not inevitabilities. Yet imaginary fears thrive precisely because they go unchallenged. The mind presents them with confidence. It speaks in urgent tones. It insists that worry equals preparation, that anxiety equals responsibility. But most of what drains human energy is not actual hardship. It is anticipation of hardship, not real obstacles, but rehearsed ones. Look closely at how this operates. An uncertain situation arises. Instead of acknowledging the unknown and remaining grounded, the mind rushes to fill the gap. It generates worst case scenarios, often with astonishing speed and detail. Each scenario produces emotional reactions, tension, dread, hesitation. Those emotions then reinforce the original thought. making it feel validated. A loop is created, entirely internal, entirely self sustaining, and all the while, the present moment, the only place where action, adaptation, and clarity exist, is overshadowed. Imaginary fears narrow perception, they shrink possibilities, they make challenge, deaths appear larger than they are, and capabilities appear smaller than they are. When you are mentally absorbed in catastrophic projections, even simple decisions feel heavy. Even manageable risks feel dangerous. The world begins to look more hostile, more unstable, more threatening than it truly is. But awareness changes everything. When you begin observing your thoughts instead of automatically believing them, you reclaim a profound degree of freedom. You start recognizing patterns. You notice exaggerations. You see how often the mind predicts disasters that never materialize. You realize how frequently fear speaks with certainty about events it cannot possibly know. This recognition is not denial of real challenges. It is refusal to be dominated by imagined ones. There is wisdom in distinguishing between legitimate caution and habitual mental alarm, between responding to actual conditions and reacting to hypothetical catastrophes. Because courage is not the absence of fear, it is clarity about what deserves your fear. Strength grows when you anchor yourself in reality rather than speculation. Right now, in this moment, many of the things the mind worries about are not occurring. They are mental constructs, not lived experiences. And while genuine difficulties may arise in life, as they inevitably do, they are best faced when they are real, not endlessly rehearsed in advance. The mind's projections are not prophecies, they are possibilities filtered through bias, memory, and emotion. Treating them as certainty gives them power they do not inherently possess. Questioning them weakens their grip. Grounding yourself in what is actually present restores perspective, and perspective restores strength. Because when you are no longer carrying the weight of countless imagined futures, your energy returns. Your thinking sharpens, your actions become more deliberate. You stop fighting shadows and start engaging with reality, which is almost always more manageable than fear predicts. So the next time anxiety begins to rise, pause, breathe, ask the simple but transformative question: is this happening now, or is this a story? Uncertainty has a way of unsettling even the strongest minds. The moment the path ahead becomes unclear, something inside you tightens. You crave answers, clarity, guarantees. You want to know how things will unfold, when they will resolve, what the outcome will be. And when those answers do not arrive, discomfort begins to grow. But there is something profoundly misunderstood about uncertainty. Most people treat it as a sign that something is wrong, as though life was supposed to present a perfectly visible roadmap at all times. They assume that confidence requires predictability, that strength requires assurance, that progress requires knowing exactly what comes next. Yet if you look at the nature of growth, real growth, lasting growth, you will find that it rarely emerges from comfort or certainty. Uncertainty is not merely an obstacle to endure. It is an environment that shapes you when everything is known, when every step is predictable. There is little demand for adaptation, little need for courage, little pressure to stretch beyond familiar limits. Certainty can feel safe, but it often keeps you operating within the boundaries of what you already understand, what you already control, what you already believe you can handle. Uncertainty changes that entirely. It forces you to move without complete visibility, to act without guarantees, to rely not on fixed outcomes, but on internal stability. And in doing so, it reveals strengths that comfort could never expose. Capabilities remain hidden until circumstances demand their use. Resilience is not built by ease, it is built by challenge. Confidence is not formed by knowing everything, it is formed by navigating what you do not know. Consider how many defining moments in life arise from the unexpected. Opportunities rarely announce themselves with perfect clarity. Transformations rarely begin with certainty. Often, you are required to step forward before the full picture becomes visible. And it is precisely this requirement that cultivates inner strength. Because when you move through uncertainty, you are training the most critical faculty of all, your ability to remain steady without constant reassurance. This is not comfortable work. The mind prefers predictability. It seeks pattern, stability, control. It interprets the unknown as risk, sometimes even as danger. And so when clarity is absent, anxiety attempts to fill the space. Doubt begins to whisper. Patience grows louder. The temptation to retreat into safety becomes strong. Yet retreat rarely produces growth. The unfamiliar, the undefined, the unresolved, these are not merely sources of stress. They are arenas of development. They require you to trust judgment over certainty, preparation over guarantees, courage over comfort. They demand that you build confidence from within rather than borrowing it from external conditions. And this is where transformation begins. When you stop expecting life to eliminate uncertainty before you act, when you stop equating the unknown with failure, when you recognize that discomfort does not imply misalignment, growth often feels unstable precisely because it stretches you beyond established patterns. New levels of capability require new levels of tolerance for ambiguity. Strength is forged in moments where outcomes are not assured, because it is there in the absence of guarantees that you discover whether your confidence depends on circumstances or character, whether your stability relies on certainty or self-trust, whether your progress requires perfect conditions or persistent action. Think about it carefully. If you only move when success is guaranteed, you remain confined to narrow possibilities. If you only act when fear is absent, you remain immobilized by hesitation. If you only proceed when the path is perfectly visible, you deny yourself the vast territory where most meaningful opportunities reside. Uncertainty is not the opposite of progress. It is often the landscape in which progress becomes possible. Every unfamiliar challenge strengthens perception. Every unpredictable situation sharpens adaptability. Every unresolved question deepens patience. These experiences stretch mental and emotional capacity in ways certainty never could. They build a quieter, more durable confidence, the confidence that does not collapse when answers are delayed or conditions fluctuate. Over time, something remarkable occurs. What once triggered anxiety begins to evoke composure. What once felt threatening begins to feel navigable. Not because uncertainty disappears from life, but because your relationship with it evolves. You no longer interpret the unknown as immediate danger. You begin to see it as a natural and even necessary dimension of expansion. You learn to move forward without demanding absolute clarity. You learn to act without waiting for perfect assurance. You learn that stability is not found in eliminating uncertainty, but in remaining grounded within it. And this understanding alters everything, because life will never present a future entirely free of the unknown. But it will repeatedly present opportunities to strengthen your capacity to face it. Each moment of uncertainty becomes an invitation not to panic, not to retreat, but to expand your confidence beyond the fragile need for guarantees. There is a misconception that quietly shapes the way many people approach faith, trust, and belief in a greater design. It is the idea that trust means waiting without effort, that surrender means disengagement, that confidence in a larger plan somehow excuses you from disciplined action. And this misunderstanding has held countless individuals in a state of passive expectation, hoping for change while remaining motionless. But trust has never meant inactivity. Real trust is not about sitting still and wishing. It is not about folding your hands and hoping circumstances rearrange themselves. Trust, in its strongest form, is deeply active. It is a decision to move forward without the constant need for guarantees. It is the ability to act with conviction even when outcomes are not fully visible. It is a refusal to let uncertainty paralyze initiative. There is a powerful difference between surrendering anxiety and surrendering responsibility. One frees you, the other weakens you. Life consistently responds to movement. Growth requires participation. Possibilities expand when effort is applied. Yet many people, under the illusion of waiting for the right moment or trusting that things will happen, unknowingly delay their own progress. They confuse hesitation with patience. They mistake avoidance for faith. They expect results disconnected from consistent, deliberate action. Trust and effort are not opposing forces, they are partners. To trust a greater plan does not mean abandoning personal agency. It means engaging fully while releasing the exhausting need to control every variable. It means doing your part with discipline, focus, and persistence while understanding that outcomes may unfold in ways you cannot entirely predict. It is a balance between responsibility and acceptance, between initiative and openness. Consider how ineffective passive belief truly is. No skill develops without practice. No structure rises without construction. No transformation occurs without repeated, often uncomfortable effort. The world does not reward intention alone. It responds to execution. Yet the mind often seeks comfort in the idea that things will improve without demanding sustained commitment. But progress has conditions, and one of the most fundamental conditions is action. Action clarifies, action strengthens, action generates momentum. When you move, you gather information, you refine judgment, you discover capabilities that remain hidden in stillness. Even imperfect steps produce learning. Even slow progress produces growth. Inactivity, by contrast, preserves doubt. It prolongs fear. It keeps potential trapped in imagination. Trust is not a replacement for effort. It is a stabilizer for effort. Without trust, action becomes tense, anxious, and fragile. Every obstacle feels catastrophic. Every delay feels discouraging. But with trust, effort becomes steadier. You continue working not because success is guaranteed on your preferred timeline, but because growth itself is meaningful, because movement itself is valuable, because persistence itself builds strength regardless of immediate outcomes. There is also a deeper psychological shift at work. When you commit to action while grounded in trust, you free yourself from the paralyzing demand for certainty. You no longer wait for fear to disappear before moving. You no longer require perfect conditions before beginning. You recognize that clarity often emerges through engagement, not before it. That confidence grows through participation, not contemplation alone. Waiting for absolute assurance is often another form of delay. Life rarely provides complete visibility in advance. Paths reveal themselves through motion. Opportunities become recognizable through use. The idea that you must feel completely ready before acting is one of the most persistent illusions that restrains human potential.
Trust enables courageous movement.
It allows you to act without being consumed by the unknown, to invest effort without demanding immediate validation, and to remain steady when results take time. It transforms action from a desperate attempt to force outcomes into a deliberate, grounded engagement with possibility. And importantly, trust protects you from the emotional volatility that often disrupts progress. Without it, motivation fluctuates with circumstances. Enthusiasm rises and collapses with external feedback. But with trust, discipline becomes more stable. You continue not because everything is easy or predictable, but because your commitment is no longer entirely dependent on immediate reward. Effort without trust becomes ineffective. Together they become powerful. So when you think about belief, about confidence, about alignment with a greater design, remember this. You are not being asked to wait idly. You are not being asked to disengage. You are being invited to participate fully, to apply your abilities, your discipline, your persistence, while releasing the unnecessary burden of trying to control every outcome. Move with intention, work with focus, build with consistency. Obstacles have a reputation they do not deserve. The moment something blocks your path, resists your effort, or disrupts your plans, the mind quickly labels it as misfortune, as interference, as proof that things are going wrong. Frustration rises, doubt follows, and without realizing it, you begin fighting the experience rather than learning from it. But obstacles are rarely as simple as they appear. What you call a barrier may actually be information. What you call resistance may actually be redirection. Yet the instinctive reaction is almost always emotional before it is rational. You see the difficulty and assume it is an enemy. You encounter delay and assume it is injustice. You face complication and assume it is failure. This interpretation feels natural, but it is often incomplete because life does not merely push you forward through ease, it shapes you through challenge. And many of the moments that initially seem obstructive are quietly performing a different function altogether: refinement, correction, alignment. How limited perception can be in the midst of struggle. When you are inside an obstacle, you see inconvenience, effort, discomfort. You do not see the larger pattern. You do not see the consequences avoided, the strengths being developed, the subtle adjustments taking place. The mind focused narrowly on immediate expectations, evaluates events without access to the broader context. And so obstacles feel like interruptions rather than instructions. Yet difficulty often carries guidance embedded within it. Not always obvious, not always comfortable, but present nonetheless. A closed door forces reevaluation. A setback forces adaptation. A complication forces creativity. These experiences disrupt momentum, yes, but they also disrupt complacency, assumption, and unexamined direction. Without obstacles, many errors would remain invisible.
Without resistance, many weaknesses would remain unchallenged.
Without difficulty, many capacities would remain undeveloped. It is easy to appreciate progress when the road is smooth, but smooth roads demand little growth. It is friction that sharpens judgment. It is challenge that deepens resilience. It is disruption that reveals whether your approach, your strategy, or even your destination requires adjustment. Obstacles slow you down for a reason. Not every reason is dramatic. In this way, obstacles often expand awareness. They force engagement at a deeper level. They demand patience where haste would have prevailed. They demand persistence where enthusiasm alone would have faded. They demand problem solving where routine would have sufficed. And through this demand, something within you strengthens. But interpretation determines experience. If you see every obstacle as punishment, frustration becomes constant. If you see every difficulty as proof of inadequacy, confidence erodes. But if you begin to view obstacles as data, as feedback rather than condemnation, your relationship with challenge transforms entirely. Instead of asking, why is this happening to me? A more powerful question emerges. What is this revealing? What is this shaping? What is this redirecting? That shift is not naive optimism. It is strategic perception because obstacles contain information, whether you acknowledge it or not. They expose flaws in planning. They highlight gaps in preparation. They test the durability of commitment. They refine emotional stability. They strengthen adaptability. Each difficulty becomes less of a verdict and more of a lesson. Even failure itself carries instruction, not as a declaration of limitation, but as a recalibration of approach. Many successes are built upon sequences of missteps, corrections, and adjustments. The obstacle that feels like a dead end may actually be forcing a better route, a stronger method, a wiser strategy. Resistance refines direction. It interrupts paths that may lead to greater difficulty. It compels reassessment that comfort would never provoke, and often only in retrospect does the hidden value become unmistakable. What once appeared obstructive reveals itself as protective. What once felt like regression reveals itself as preparation. The mind resists this interpretation because discomfort feels inherently negative. But discomfort is not always damage. Difficulty is not always opposition. Sometimes they are the mechanism through which clarity, strength, and precision are produced. They force you to slow down, think deeper, act smarter, become stronger. They shape capacities that ease could never develop. When you begin to understand this, frustration loses some of its dominance. You stop reacting as though every challenge were a catastrophe. You begin responding with curiosity, composure, and analysis. You recognize that progress is not defined by the absence of obstacles, but by the ability to navigate them without surrendering clarity or confidence. And this recognition builds a quieter, more durable strength. The re is a quiet power in calmness that the world often underestimates. In a culture that glorifies urgency, noise, and constant reaction, stillness can appear passive, almost fragile. People mistake intensity for strength, anxiety for commitment, restlessness for productivity. Yet if you observe closely, you will see that a composed mind possesses a level of effectiveness that panic can never achieve. Worry feels active, but it rarely produces clarity. It creates motion without progress, thought without resolution, tension without direction. The mind spins, revisiting the same concerns, amplifying the same uncertainties, exhausting itself in loops that generate very little of practical value. And while this mental turbulence unfolds, perception narrows, judgment becomes clouded, decisions lose precision. Calmness operates differently. It does not rush, it does not shout, it does not scramble under pressure. It creates space between stimulus and response, allowing thought to regain structure and perspective. When the mind is steady, you see more. You interpret more accurately. You recognize possibilities that anxiety would have concealed. Peace is not the absence of activity. It is the foundation of effective activity. Consider how the mind functions under stress. When consumed by worry, attention fragments. Every potential risk appears magnified. Every uncertainty feels threatening. The brain shifts into defensive mode, prioritizing imagined dangers over rational evaluation. In that state, even simple choices feel heavy because fear distorts proportion. But when you cultivate inner stillness, perception stabilizes. Challenges remain, but they no longer dominate your internal landscape. Problems exist, but they are no longer inflated by catastrophic thinking. You begin responding rather than reacting, acting rather than flinching. Calmness restores the ability to engage with reality instead of being overwhelmed by projections. There is also a deeper psychological advantage. A peaceful mind conserves energy. Worry is exhausting not because problems are inherently unbearable, but because constant mental resistance drains cognitive and emotional resources. The body carries tension, the thoughts accelerate, the nervous system remains unsettled. Over time, this state erodes resilience, reducing the very capacity needed to face difficulty. Calmness, by contrast, preserves strength. It allows the mind to allocate resources efficiently. Focus sharpens. Emotional stability increases. You become less susceptible to impulsive decisions driven by fear or frustration. The ability to remain composed becomes a strategic asset, not merely an emotional preference. This does not mean indifference or disengagement. True calmness is not apathy, it is decision to remain internally grounded regardless of external volatility. It is the refusal to let every disruption dictate your emotional state. Because when your mind is constantly hijacked by circumstances, your effectiveness becomes fragile, dependent on conditions you cannot fully control. Peace restores autonomy. You no longer need the world to be perfectly predictable to feel steady. You no longer interpret every uncertainty as a crisis. You develop a quieter confidence, the confidence that clarity does not require chaos, that strength does not require agitation, that urgency does not guarantee effectiveness. Think about the moments in life when your best decisions were made. Rarely were they born from panic. Rarely were they shaped by frantic thinking. More often, they emerge from composure, from reflection, from mental steadiness. Calmness allows intelligence to function at its full capacity. It permits perspective to widen. It reduces the distortions introduced by fear-driven urgency. Worry narrows, peace expands. Worry amplifies threat. Peace restores proportion. Worry scatters energy. Peace directs it. And perhaps most importantly, calmness influences not only your internal experience, but your external impact. A composed presence stabilizes situations. It improves communication. It strengthens leadership. It fosters trust. When you are not governed by anxiety, your actions carry greater intentionality and confidence. Yet many people resist calmness because it feels unfamiliar. They are so accustomed to mental noise that stillness feels like inaction. They equate tension with seriousness, as though relaxation implied irresponsibility. But constant agitation is not a requirement for progress. In fact, it often obstructs progress by impairing judgment and draining endurance. Peace is not weakness, it is clarity amid uncertainty. It is strength without unnecessary strain. Cultivating this state requires awareness and practice. It requires recognizing when the mind is generating turbulence without purpose. It requires interrupting cycles of repetitive worry. It requires deliberately returning attention to what is real, what is actionable, what is within influence. Over time, something remarkable occurs. Calmness becomes natural rather than forced. You begin meeting challenges with steadiness instead of reflexive tension. You retain perspective where others lose it. You maintain clarity where others become overwhelmed. Not because life becomes easier, but because your internal response becomes more stable. And stability changes everything, because a peaceful mind is not merely more pleasant, it is more capable, more resilient, more effective. This reflection resonates. Take a moment today to notice how often worry attempts to dominate your thinking. And consciously practice returning to stillness, reminding yourself that clarity and strength are most powerful when rooted in calm awareness.